Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to a special revisit episode of Saturday Horror Movie Reviews. Today, I am joined by Robby Horror, who has been here before. We did Trick or Treat back in October. It was a very, very passionate discussion. In the best of ways, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about all of the things that we talked about was Hereditary. So today we are going to be discussing my revisit and general feelings on the 2018 A24 film Hereditary. So right now this is streaming in a couple of places. I watched it on HBO Max, so you can, if you are watching this and you have not seen it, you can stream it. Right now on IMDb, this sits at a 7.3 out of 10, a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes for the user reviews, an 81% on Just Watch, and a 75% on Google. It just says, when the matriarch of the Grant family passes away, her daughter and grandchildren begin to unravel cryptic and increasingly terrifying secrets about their ancestry, trying to outrun the sinister fate they have inherited. So it's going to be pretty typical for those of you who watch the Saturday Horror Movie Reviews. It's going to be really similar, but I am going to also give, in addition to my final rating, I'm going to give what my thoughts were and my rating was on it my first watch, because this is a movie that I have discussed openly hating for years at this point. And you have a lot of love for this, right?
Me? Oh yes, absolutely. I was debating actually wearing. I have like a Robby Horror VHS stack shirt with my favorite horror films, and Hereditary is up there. I love that movie.
Yeah. That's kind of how I think, decided we were going to talk about it together, was because it was such opposite ends of it.
Yes.
So what do you give this out of 10? What's your rating for this film?
Oh man, I typically rate out of 4 because it's less granular. It's much more straightforward. It's like, all right.
That's why I do 10, because then I have more room to judge.
Oh man. Let's say, all right.
Well, give me your out of your normal, and then tell me what you're.
Sure. If Halloween is a 10, I'd say Hereditary is like a 9 for
Okay.
me. I think
Definitely up
it's
there.
mwah.
Yeah. So the first time I watched this, I watched it. I didn't go. This got a theater release, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't go see it in theaters. My first watch was when it came available on video on demand. It was one I had been wanting to see. And I finally, when it was available to rent, I watched it. And I think one thing that's going to come up a lot as we talk about this film is that the first time I watched it, I was in my home with my, at the time, partner, and all I heard was how awful the movie was from start to finish.
Yeah.
Just constant, just negative. That's dumb. I don't understand what's going on. I don't like that. Negative. And one of the things that a friend of mine, Ron, brought up on his podcast was this concept that when you go, who you go with and what you're experiencing while you're watching a film can often impact how you take what you're viewing. And I think, given the things that I feel now, I do think that had a very large impact on my disdain for this movie, because all I heard was that constant negative. So my original rating for this out of 10 would have been like, no exaggeration, like a 1 or a 2, like really, really low. Okay.
Ouch.
I had a lot of disdain. I hated this movie. I'm not a super big fan of A24. That much has not changed. Their films are very, very, very hit or miss for me. So with this one, and I did actually kind of like Midsommar. I didn't love it, but I did like it. And this is, Ari Aster is the same person that did Midsommar. So my new rating for this, after rewatching, and then I rewatched The End again today, because that's kind of the meat of the film, I think, is in the ending. And so I wanted to rewatch it, because after I've been thinking about it for a few days and such. So my new rating for this, I would say, and this is going to shock the shit out of so many people, I would give this like a 7.5 now.
Woo! All right, awesome.
Yeah.
If I may, without giving anything away, what would you count as the ending? Like the last few minutes, or like the final sequence?
The last 20 minutes. So I would say the final sequence. Yes.
All right. We'll get to. Sequence. I'm curious where exactly that picks up on. I think I know.
Yeah.
I think I know.
And I think so. I think the things that this does well that I missed out on because of what I was dealing with while I was watching it for the first time, and this is something everyone says about this buildup of atmosphere is a lot better. It was a lot better done for me as a second watch than it was the first watch, because I think my concentration on all of the things that build up to those unsettling moments was very disrupted. And I just think that that had a lot to play with, like, me not being able to get invested in the characters. I didn't really see anything scary about the film, which I do not think I felt at all the second time. I thought the atmosphere was really strong. I mean, Toni Collette is a gem. Like, I need her in more horror. I absolutely love her in general,
Mhm.
and not just in a horror sense. I just think she's a fantastic actress. I think she acted the hell out of this movie. I don't know that I felt there were any, like, I'm trying to think, like, weak character. I think everybody did a really good job. I liked the background of the story, family secret kind of stuff, cult stuff, like all that stuff that's very prominent. Like, even when you watch the trailer, you pick up on some of that stuff. But yeah, I think everything that makes this film special for other people just worked a lot more for me as a second watch.
That's so interesting. I can definitely see that because, as you said, a lot of the foundation of this particular film, and Ari Aster's work in general, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what we would consider what's, it's kind of a misnomer, but what's
Mm.
relate to as elevated horror,
Yes.
which for the record, I know that Ari Aster himself has said that he finds the term obnoxious because in his own words, horror there's always been a dichotomy, as it is with any genre,
Sure.
between the works that are quote unquote artful and thoughtful and
Mm-hmm.
layered and have, some sort of meaning to it. And then there's also the kind that we as fans love, the gore, the more
Mm-hmm.
schlocky stuff, the
Yeah.
slashers.
Yeah.
There's some overlap. I think Scream is one that has ideas, it has a lot of layers to it, but it
Mm-hmm.
also delivers on what the fans are expecting.
Yep.
But
Yep.
he said in 1968 we had Rosemary's Baby. We
Mm-hmm.
had, I think it was called The Blood of Fu Manchu. Both
Yep.
sides of the spectrum, and in the center we had Night of the Living Dead,
Yep.
which managed to deliver on all fronts. So he said he finds that it's interesting that this term is coming up now,
Yeah.
because that relationship between art and kind of commerce and pleasing the fans and pleasing the mass market has always been there. So I
Yeah.
think that was an interesting point that he made. But I
Yeah.
can definitely understand because when I first saw Blair Witch Project, I saw it at a house party on VHS with a bunch of people, and I could not get into it.
Yeah.
And same thing as you, the people I'm watching with are kind of saying it doesn't make sense. I can't see. I'm getting motion sickness, and that impacted me.
Exactly.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I saw it several years later in
Mhm.
college in my dorm room by myself that I
Yeah.
really understood what Blair Witch Project was all about.
You know what's funny that you say that? The person I was talking about, Ron, that was talking about his movie experience being ruined, it was the Blair Witch Project.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
he just didn't like it the first time because of the company around. And then he did the same thing later on, I don't know how long, but much later, he went back and revisited it completely alone and walked away with a very different feeling.
in some horror films, in some works in general, whether it's theater, film, television, like sometimes the work is so, for lack of a better word, delicate that you need focus.
Yeah.
Whenever I tell someone to watch Session 9, for instance, or The
Oh,
Changeling,
yes.
you need total silence. You need focus so that nothing else is getting in the way of your experience.
So
Meanwhile,
true.
Scream, Halloween, Trick or Treat, you can watch those House of a Thousand Corpses, for example. You
Yeah.
can watch those at a house party. You're getting all the detail,
Yeah, it
and
doesn't. Yeah.
it's not deep. You can still enjoy it while still, kind of talking
Yeah.
to the screen.
So true. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that Session 9 is such a great example of that too. And then there's I think too, like, even aside from just like the environment, there are some horror movies that I just don't know that you can have a collected opinion on if you haven't seen it more than once. Like, there are just some movies that take multiple watches, I think, for to get just everything that you're supposed to get out of watching them. And I think that's okay. I think it's fine. But I think Hereditary isn't so much one of those. I mean, definitely watch it more than once because there's a bunch of stuff that you don't pick up on the
Mm.
first time you're watching it. But like there's some stuff that, yeah, I just think in general is worth watching multiple times so you can get a little bit more out of it. Because there's stuff that I've seen 2 times that when I go back a third, I catch on something else, or so. But this was one that after I saw it that first time, I was like, I'm never watching this again. I hated it. Like I tagged you and I shared it
Yep.
on my Facebook memory from when it came out on video on demand. Was like, well, now that that's shit over, I'm going to bed. Because I was so angry about it. But I really do like, and I'm not walking away from this. This isn't probably going to make very many top lists for me. I'm not just all of a sudden absolutely in love with it,
Mhm.
but I got it more this time around.
Yeah.
And I was able to be a little more, well, a lot more scared, more uncomfortable than I was in the original watch. And I'm like, I'm glad that I revisited it and kind of like got off my pedestal. Like, no.
I'm glad that you did too. And I post about it, and of course, I think that
Yeah.
post I did it. I think in maybe 2020 or 2021
Mm,
was a lot of engagement on that post of people saying they loved it, people saying that they hated it, questioning
yeah.
why I liked it, and I was like, well,
Yeah.
I wrote a post explaining why I liked it, but
Yeah.
if you want to go further, and they were like, challenging me on different details, and I was
Mm,
just saying, I think the film has a ton to offer. It's no surprise that
yeah.
Ingmar Bergman is one of Ari Aster's foremost kind of influences, because that's a filmmaker that's all about not just what's being seen, but what's being felt, what's being
Yeah.
discussed. Really big ideas and big emotional kind of crescendos in that work.
Yeah.
And Hereditary is not a film that works in its entirety unless you can, first of all, hear the psychological
Yep.
turmoil that this family is experiencing,
Yes.
and that directly leads to how horrific the last half of the film is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I agree. I think that the way that so I would categorize this. I don't know if you feel the same way, but to me, this is grief horror. Like this falls
yes.
under a story about like processing grief and not just at like a basic we just lost Mufasa in the Lion King kind of way. This is a very like layered emotional journey through grief of multiple things.
Hmm.
And so I think that like that in itself, and grief horror is one that does not always work for me either, because while I like dark and heavy, I don't necessarily always like sad horror. Like there has to be like I'm just very picky, about that. But I think that this does a really good job of investing you in the emotions of not just the one person experiencing grief, but everybody that's experiencing it, and from multiple perspectives, which I'll kind of elaborate on when we actually like get into spoilers because I don't want to ruin too much.
You were saying before how you know, the child your child can kind of feel that you've had a bad day, and that's when they want more of your attention.
Yeah,
And I was thinking that's a lot like Peter in the film.
he's
He
an
senses.
empath, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He definitely senses his mother's mental illness. He senses her grief,
everything.
her not just her grief, but just like the incredible pain that she's experienced in her life, and he wants more of her attention throughout his life, which is why she, being the type of person that she is, pushes him away.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I think yeah, because and he feels literally the entire range from the bitterness and the anger and resentment. Like I mean, everything that she feels is almost channeled through him at various points in the film. That's a really, that's true. And I think like because you do have so many people feeling so many different things, it's really hard. Because I remember thinking this even at my first watch, like it's hard to watch this and not feel anything. Like I don't
yeah.
know, like because there are so many like variants of emotions and so many different perspectives that those feelings are coming from. I don't know that anybody could watch this and it not feel something at some point.
If you don't feel anything, if you don't find something in this film to connect to, provided that you're listening to it and paying
And paying
attention,
attention.
I don't know what to say about that, because the film hits, not just grief, many kind of deep chords that I feel like even I understand. And I've had like I've been lucky to have, supportive parents, and like my
Yeah.
life has been nothing like the Grams, but I
Yeah.
still understood it in a sense. I
Yeah.
felt it
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Um, so the last thing I'll say as far as like unspoiled, and then we can kind of jump a little deeper into
Mhm.
stuff is the only other thing I walked away from the first time was I thought when I first watched it that it was very boring because there is that really big event that happens. And then after that, we get a different type of buildup into the
Mhm.
last sequence of the film. And a lot of films that I would categorize as slow burns aren't really set up like that.
Mm.
Usually slow burns are slow from start until the last like, half hour, however long of the film, the third act usually. And so I think and this is now I'm looking at it a little bit differently. I wouldn't say this was a bad thing anymore, but I had a hard time with doing so much so fast and then not doing anything major again, until later. And so I think going back as a revisit after having conversations with people that love it, after reading articles about it and seeing people post about it, I think the having it set up that way makes a lot more sense now than it did
Mm.
at my first watch. My first watch, it felt really like discombobulated. Like it didn't make sense to me why it was done that way. But after being able to really pay attention to and kind of go on this journey with the family, like I feel like the way that it happened, when it happened, actually made way more sense than I gave it credit for first time around.
Oh, definitely. I mean, like the marketing for this film was so devious in that sense, and Ari
Yeah.
Aster, he purposefully rolled it out this way, making us think it's one type of film.
Yep.
We'll get into spoilers about that later, but
Yeah.
and then 40 minutes in, the rug is pulled out from under you, and you're like, all right, what kind of movie is this now? What are we
What's
watching?
gonna, yeah.
And if you're not keyed into it from the start and ready to take the ride for what it ultimately is, I can
Hmm.
definitely see why having that would be kind of like a moment where you're like, all right, I'm kind of checked out right now. What is like
Yeah.
I don't feel this right now,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that I can't even say anything. I can't say anything. I can't say anything right now.
No, that's okay. Well, we're gonna. I didn't. That's good. I think like I know we both have a lot to say about it out like into the spoiler stuff. So we'll just go ahead and if you are not familiar with Hereditary, if you have not seen it, like I said, you can stream it. It's on HBO Max, but I feel like it's on something else. I'm just drawing a blank, but you can stream it. I do recommend checking this one out, especially if you are an A24 fan, because I'm always interested to see A24 fans' opinions of A24 movies versus people who aren't normally. But yeah, we're going to jump into spoilers. So definitely go check out Hereditary if you have not seen it, or I guess if you don't care if it's spoiled, then I guess there's that too.
No,
Um, yeah.
why? No.
You can't say I didn't tell you, and that's the important part. Yeah, so I don't really have like a I do want to talk about the ending, but I'm gonna wait. I want to talk
Yeah,
about some other stuff first because I have questions for you as someone who has seen this a few times and
sure.
does have a lot of love for this film. I think there's a piece missing for me that I need explained, but I'm gonna ask about that
Mm,
later since it does specifically have to do with the ending.
okay.
Um, so one of the things that I noticed on the second watch is how early the cult is like embedded in the family's life.
Yeah,
Like I didn't pay any of that attention the first time I watched it. The symbol on the stupid pole, the people at the funeral, there's a couple of other things like that that I watched this time around and I was like
they've been there the whole time,
the
the whole
whole
time,
time.
and ostensibly much earlier.
Yes, of course.
It's the
Yeah.
first time we're seeing them, but I'm sure
Right.
Annie was like, my mother had secret friends. They're all in the funeral home with her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They are. And that was like one of the things that I think like really like got me in like I don't know, I guess like more engaged this time around like quickly because I was like, I went into it and I told myself I was like you are going into this with a clear slate, no like existing feelings, emotions, thoughts, whatever. And I'm proud that I was able to even do that to be honest because when I really don't like films it's very hard for me to revisit, but I thought this would be a good challenge and it was challenging at first, but when I started picking up on that stuff so early, I was like I don't remember noticing any of this stuff before, and you're just like, oh my God. Like, and that, talk about building atmosphere. That was scary. Like seeing these people, like they're there like all the time. I don't know. That part was like really uncomfortable for me.
I love that. And, I think we were talking about before about films that
Hmm.
almost require another watch. I think this is one of them.
Yeah.
You get the entire story the
Yep.
first time. There might be pieces that you're kind of mulling over a little bit,
Yeah.
particularly as it has to do with the curse and like how long has this been going on? What is
Yes.
exactly the plan?
Yes.
Um, but like you said, noticing the cult earlier, noticing the symbols earlier, and also a lot of the foreshadowing that, there's a conversation between Annie and Charlie about like, who's going to take care of me now that grandma's gone? It's like, oh, I'm going to take care of you. But what about when you die?
Hmm.
Suggesting that she's Charlie, but in a sense, but there's also something in her that is signaling to her that the family will perish, and that
Yeah.
is somehow aware of that. But also,
Yeah.
Annie's first grief support meeting, where she is
Yeah.
divulging basically her life story for the group, but also for us. So we're up to date on what her relationship was like with Ellen,
Yep.
what her relationship was like with her family,
Hmm.
and then we get information about an incident with her and her children where she almost killed them. And having the full context makes those scenes even eerier and more terrifying because
Yeah.
when I think it was her brother who committed suicide because
Suicide.
he felt that his mother was trying to put people inside of him. And spoiler alert, she was like that.
She was
She meant
100%.
that literally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think she says he was like 16 or something. He was a teenager.
Yeah.
He was like the same age as her son. Right.
Mm,
That was kind of yeah. Well, and I think too, like, when we watch things, and I say this all the time, like with slasher specifically, but there's plenty of subgenres of horror that info dump. And this is such a non-info dumping way to give us a ton of info at one time because
mm,
we don't know that much about their relationship. I mean, obviously it seems very like not healthy or something. Like there's definitely something there that is telling us like there's like something going on with this. But the way that they chose, writing wise to tell us these things was actually really smart and
mm,
felt really natural. Like I didn't feel like it was a cop out. I didn't feel like we just got this information because it was lazy and there was no other way to give it to us. Like it felt methodical and intentional, and it gave Toni Collette as an actress, like she delivered on that scene because everything as she's going through these stages of the things that she's experienced and how she's feeling, her emotions are reflected as her tone changes, the way she's sitting changes, her face, everything. And so it just gives us this full wrapped around like 360 picture
mhm.
of her feelings and these things that she's been through. And it was a really smart scene in my opinion.
Brilliantly done, see, brilliantly written and performed, like you said.
Yeah.
And like you said, a full spectrum, a full
Yeah.
view of what this woman's life has been like. When we first meet her, she seems a little prickly. She
Yeah.
seems a little bit not like a little bit neglectful. They forgot the EpiPen, for instance.
Yes.
She says after the funeral, should I be sadder? There's something going on between
Yeah.
her children, her husband, her mother,
Yeah.
that you just can't quite put your finger on, but there is a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And not just in that scene, but just in scenes between her and Peter, her
Yeah.
and Charlie, her and her husband Stephen, the way that he kind of always tries to reach out to her, and she either shuts it down, like they're in bed, he puts his hand on her, and what does she do in response? She gets up and goes to sleep in the
Yep.
treehouse.
Yep.
Little things like that that really, apart from dialogue exposition, tell
Mhm.
you what this family's been like and what they are like right now, and it's not a good place. It's not a healthy place where people can
Yeah.
openly communicate.
Yeah. And it's obviously, I don't, definitely gives me the impression that it hasn't been healthy in a really long time, even before the death of her mother. Like yeah. And I think it's interesting because like you talk about like the way that they are without using dialogue, there's always a lot of space between her and the husband. There's only like two scenes of true connection, and one of them is the seance, and that's because she has to hold hands, and that's like the closest, like that's close for them. And then there's that one scene, when she's like trying to convince him to burn the book, or the not the book, the writing pad or whatever,
Hmm.
right? It's writing pad.
Yep.
And there is a lot, she puts a lot of physical distance between them, throughout the entire film, which I noticed right away. Like it's like it's a weird, like you'd almost want to make it normal in your head, but your gut is telling you that it means something more than just, oh, I'm just going through a hard time right now and I need space, because she has such different relationships with all the people, like her, Charlie, Peter, and then Steve, her husband. Like all of those relationships are so very different. And she gets closer to her children than she allows herself to get to her husband. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of scenes like that where there's a lot of distance between them. And then with her kids, there's times where there's distance with Peter, but there's times where she's really close to him. And then there's times, of course, when she's really close to Charlie. So it's just a weird thing to notice the way that that is staged, is like showing you the dynamics of the relationship, like you said, without using dialogue at all.
No, absolutely. And it's, the reality of this particular film, what resonated with me was
Yeah.
how much I can't say I liked Annie, but I definitely felt for her
I know what you
deep,
mean. Yeah.
deeply. Like I said, she's a hard person to get close to. She does that, with intention. Just in a general sense, the family is hard to warm up to, but they're easy to empathize with,
Yeah.
and you feel for them in spite of just how it's messy. It's like real life,
It,
and seeing the way that Annie and Steve behave together independently, you
mhm.
understand why Charlie and Peter turned out the way that they did. Peter is a normal kid. He means well. In fact, in that dinner scene where Annie
Oh,
explodes at him, he's doing the emotionally mature thing, which is asking her, "You seem to have something on your mind. What
what
is
is
it?"
it? You got
And
something to say?
to her that's antagonistic, in
Yeah.
that moment at least. And then
Yeah.
you understand that this is why Peter retreats to just being kind of by himself with his weed and his hoodie, and he's not in all the family pictures. He tends to be off on the side,
Mhm.
and it's really fantastic writing and directing because it all makes psychological sense when you really parse out the family, their different sensibilities, their different weak points, and
Yeah.
it just you look at them all together and you're like, all right, this is a full spectrum psychological portrait of a
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think the dinner scene is another really, really strong scene, because it's interesting to see, like, a person I feel for a lot too is the dad, because
Yeah.
I feel like he has literally he does not know what to do. He's supposed to be, he's trying really hard, I think, to be this strong, like, role for the family right now. He can see the cracks in Annie, after her mother passes, and then of course the big stuff with Charlie.
Mhm.
And like he's somebody that I just feel for. And so when I posted on Twitter that I was revisiting this for our conversation, there was somebody who like went off in the comments about how much they hated this movie, which is fine. I mean, it's not like, not at me, but just, strong
Mm.
feelings about this movie. And one of the things that she said was how useless the father character was, which actually, after a
Mm.
second watch, I don't think I necessarily agree with.
Mm-mm.
I think the father is a very realistic role in a dire situation. Like I think the want to be the love and the support and the strength that your family needs, and not having any of the tools to do it. They're not letting you do it. So much of this is out of his hands, and he doesn't know what to do, because if he supports her the way she wants to be supported, he's enabling her. And if he doesn't support her like that, then he's abandoning her. And there's this weird, pull, because it's like he tries so hard to do the right thing, but he has no idea what that is. And I think like the dinner scene is like the perfect balance of like all of those dynamics kind of coming to a head, because we see Peter, he's like silent for a lot of this. Annie goes off and he's silent for a lot of it, and he's tearing up, but he's not saying anything for a few minutes. And then when he finally decides to speak after he's asked the initial questions, it's, well, why was she at the party? But he
Mhm.
says it in such a way that you would almost, if he weren't crying, if he didn't have tears in his eyes, you would almost assume he was numb to all of it. He just says it in this very just like matter of fact, calm, it's like talking about the weather kind of voice. He just
Mhm.
says, well, why was she at the party? Like very like
She didn't want
and
to go.
She didn't want to go. And that moment, because I like that specific scene, I don't really remember my thoughts from the first watch because it was kind of a while ago now. But at me watching that on the second watch, I was like, ow.
Mhm.
Like I was just like, damn,
He
like
sat there
there's
and took all of that. And like, to his great credit, he didn't
mhm.
try to match her intensity. He let her vent because really that's one of the best things in the film that she can do.
Yeah,
That she can let it feel, and that's what happens when you oppress it for so long. Like who knows when the last time she had an outburst like that was? But the fact is, all the grams to an extent keep it suppressed.
they
Charlie
do.
Charlie has, in the sense of the character, she doesn't really have any idea who she is, and that there's a
Right.
reason for that. So she's
Yep.
kind of conflicted. But Peter, Stephen, and Annie, they're not. They don't communicate. They don't understand how to
No.
communicate in a healthy way. Stephen
Mm-mm.
tries. I feel like mentally he's the most present and the most with it.
Yes.
And even him at the
Agree.
dinner, when Peter's asking his mother, is there something you want to say, or is there something you want to tell
Mhm.
me? Something's on your mind. He keeps
Mhm.
saying, no, no, don't needle her, don't
Mhm.
antagonize her or something.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, he's trying to keep the peace, but he's not doing it in a way that allows these two people to mediate with each other.
Yeah.
He's trying to pacify it, which at that point seems to him like the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
But
Because
really,
I think he knows ultimately when all of these things come out, he's not going to know how to pick up the pieces.
mhm,
And he's literally, it's like, it's like in the cartoons when like a leak springs in a boat and you cover it with your hand and then you cover this one with your hand and then
yeah,
you cover this with your foot and
yeah,
eventually you run out of limbs and you can't cover it up anymore and then you
mhm,
sink. And that's like exactly what is happening around him. And it sucks because like, when he doesn't really get an opportunity to grieve Charlie,
yeah,
like not really. He's so focused on Annie and then trying to keep his son together. And there's even that one clip which seems so simple, but I think is actually quite important to when talking about like Steve and Peter's relationship. Is that his name is Steve, right? I'm not butchering
yeah.
it. Okay. I'm normally really bad with names, so kudos for me.
You got
Um,
it.
so like that one scene when Peter comes in and he goes up the stairs and it's after he's seen the stuff at the school and he says to him, oh, you need to sign up for that SAT course or class or whatever. And it's such an
Oh,
ordinary thing to say, but it's so full of all this other shit that's been going on. And that moment of like when he says that as Peter's rushing up the stairs or whatever, go to his room or whatever, you're just like, oh my God. Like I think it's just like such a, I don't know how to explain exactly how I felt, but I felt sad. I felt
it's
very sad.
visceral. It's visceral.
Yeah.
You know what he's trying to say, and we've all been there.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you have a fight with someone, or you're just in an emotionally raw place, and someone else is sharing that, someone's like, thanks for cleaning that up for me, or something like that. And when it's
Just to
loaded
kind
with
of,
so much else that you want to say,
that's so
and
true.
with actors of the caliber of Gabriel Byrne, Alex Wolff,
Yeah.
Tony Collette, they're
Yeah.
able to rise to meet that material.
Yeah.
And also the scene where I think it's Steven going to pick up Peter after
After,
he after yeah after the
mhm.
nose job, so to speak.
Yeah.
That he just it's the first time that we see him crack, and he
Yes.
breaks down in the car, and you're just like, oh, because you've been waiting for that the entire movie, like this poor guy. To say that he's useless, I don't think that's fair. He does the best that he can. What else can he do except try and be present for them the best that he can? And you're so right. That's his first time that we see him grieving his family and what's happened to them.
Because he has no chance. He has literally taken on a role that countless people, moms, dads, friends, partners have taken on for the people that they love, and that somebody has to keep it together. And he, I think, knows that they are in no position, least of all a child, a teenager, can be like, you can't put that on them. And I think he knows, his wife can't handle it. Like there's just too much. And so he tries to be that rock, that solid figure for them and their family. And then like, and it's weird because like normally I would say like when you have characters, sometimes when you have characters like that and then they have a break, their break is like a humanizing moment. But I felt every moment with Steve was a humanizing moment. I felt like every moment that we see with him and his feelings and what he's experiencing it all just, it's like I get it. Like I just understand what it was such a unique thing, because he almost, if you weren't to really pay attention, or if you maybe didn't see it multiple times, or if you didn't really care for the film and you weren't invested in it, you would almost think he wasn't a main character, because
Yeah.
the way that the story is built around him is he's not really a main character, but the story does not work without his character. Like he has to be there because he plays a vital role in all of the other things that are connected with the family and what we see with their dynamics and how they're feeling and what they're going through. It's a very important role.
No, that's so true. Like, from a dramatic standpoint, we see the film primarily at first through Charlie's eyes,
Yes.
then Annie's eyes, and
Yep.
then Peter's eyes at
Hmm.
the very end. And to that's more or less how it works out. Like there are
Right.
varying
Sure.
degrees to
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but Stephen is the one who is able to kind of I don't know how to put this, but like in a way, he helps humanize these other figures who, without him, it would just be chaos, like dishes
Utter
being thrown.
chaos.
And,
Yep.
he's crucial because really the family, let's say that he divorced Annie sooner,
Hmm.
the family would not, who knows what would have become of the family at that point. He is the
Yeah.
reason that they're literally still standing there today. Well, not anymore, but like when we first meet them, he's the reason why when we first meet them, he is the reason why they're still
He's
at
the
peace.
reason.
Yeah.
And it's clear, and they show us that so early with everything else that he takes on, like the handling of the funeral stuff, the handling, like the very, just he takes care of like everything while they are just moving scene to scene, going through whatever they're going through. So, when Annie loses her mom and she's going through the things she's going through, like he's in the background doing all of these things. We see that when Charlie dies, she's in the bed upstairs, he's downstairs wrapping up from people coming for the visit, or the whatever it's called, the visitation thing. And there's all these little moments of him doing things, cooking dinner because she wasn't going to, like, and then and that was another moment that, like, I don't know how to explain how this made me feel either, but that scene is at the dinner scene where Peter tells his dad that the food is good,
Mm.
and Annie's reaction is like a like a like a scoff, I
Yeah,
guess.
it's like it's like is she feeling jealous that he never complimented her? Is she upset that he's trying to make light of any sort of
I
conversation?
know.
It's loaded with different interpretations, but
Yeah.
that's why I love the acting in general of this film,
Yeah.
because just through interviews with Astor and with the cast, he wrote characters that required actors of great depth and bravery.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you know, I think all of them, without exception, even Ann Dowd, who plays Joan, Millie
Joan.
Shapiro, who plays Charlie,
Yeah.
all of them have extensive theater experience because
Okay.
you need the material demands that size. And like right there on your screen, I see Annie's dinner monologue, which
Dinner.
you
Yeah.
need a theater actor's sense
Hmm.
of the command of the word,
Yeah.
command of size, just to
Hmm.
make it as compelling and as accessible as possible. Um, it's
Yeah.
truly incredible what performances he got, and Gabriel Byrne, for instance,
Yeah.
um, because his character is feels ancillary in parts. You need
Mhm.
an actor who can really fill in those gaps through body
Mhm.
language and through just very simple line readings about SATs
Yeah.
to really make you understand what the character's going through. A
Yeah.
lesser performance, you wouldn't have gotten all that, even if it's on the page. You need the actor to communicate it.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like stage plays, how
Hmm?
you have to rely on all these other things to like get the point across, which when I was talking about, the distance and like what that kind of translates into as interpretive, like from the audience, and like what we're supposed to feel in those moments based on the physical distance between. There is a play that I broke down when I was in college for an English assignment called The Doll's House, or Doll
Hmm.
House, or something like that. And there was a lot of the way that that play was written. It's very much it's a story about a husband and wife and their money problems, but the husband, in almost every scene until the very end, is always in some manner taller than the wife. So it's written in a way that when you're looking at it on stage, he is always above her. Always. She's either sitting down or like, and it's just something about the way that it was staged. And that's what this reminds me of. This would be like watching something on a stage where you did have to rely on a lot of other things to
Mhm.
make everything else work, including the dialogue. Like, because otherwise, like, if this was written as it is, and none of those other things, like you said, the gaps were filled, this would not be anywhere near as effective as it is.
No, 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 absolutely not. I mean, and Ari Aster, for all of his skills as a filmmaker,
Hmm.
I think his greatest asset, or one certainly one of them, is that similar to what Jordan Peele does, and I feel like other filmmakers do this too, but those two are kind of the top of their game, in my opinion,
Hmm.
for right now, is that
Yeah.
they understand, on one hand, they understand genre tropes and genre imagery and genre
So
tone
true.
so
Yes.
well, but they're able
Yeah.
to spike it with really, with Jordan Peele, it's, it tends to be a little bit more about pop culture,
Yep.
race issues, culture
Yep.
issues. But
Hmm.
with Ari Aster, it's very much about these deep psychological probing topics: grief, mental illness, in this
Hmm.
case, a genetic mental illness.
Yep.
Like really just deep, heavy stuff
I agree. Yeah.
that he's using these genre trappings as a vehicle for.
Yeah.
And the script is load like look at any one script of this page,
Hmm.
especially towards the beginning and the center, and
Hmm.
you'd feel like you're reading a stage play because the writing is so incisive
Yeah.
and it's so specific and it just demands excellence from whoever's performing it.
That's 100%. On a second view, I wouldn't. This was again not something I would have gathered from the first viewing, but as a second watch, that is 100% the way that I perceived this. Like, that's what it reminded me of, was experiencing something on a stage versus a screen. That's, which are very different experiences. But I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that really speaks to me like that I would have said the same thing about. But this, yeah, it definitely reminded me of a play. Like, really did remind me of
And I would love to see him do a play, just
of
off
this, of
top.
Hereditary.
Well, not necessarily of Hereditary, although for long stretches, he
Yeah.
really does let that whole seance scene with the family, any scene with Joni,
Yeah.
the dinner scene. Like I can see acting workshops taking these scenes and using them for their own actors who are
Yeah.
studying. Like they're that well written that
I
they
agree.
would, they would challenge the actor to kind of rise to it.
Yeah. And I think like the very like the more revealing scary moments. So like I so the seance with Joan, with her grandson coming back,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So that scene was like, that one was a little spooky. The one with Charlie was a little spooky.
Mhm.
But to me, a lot of what made this unsettling was more of the emotional, psychological side. For me as a viewer, I didn't start getting the what's actually in front of me is scary until like the third act of the film. So,
Yeah.
first of all, I was not expecting the decapitation scene. That totally, like, well, I don't even know. Like, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay. Like, I
You're talking
was
about Charlie or Annie?
with Charlie.
Okay.
Yeah, the first one with
Okay.
Charlie.
Yeah.
Like, when she, I I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought she was actually just going to die. Like, I thought, okay, she's going to go into anaphylactic shock or whatever it is from being allergic to the peanuts and stuff. But then, like, she rolled the window down, and immediately I was like, oh, I don't like this. Like, I really don't like this. And then she sticks her head out the window, and I'm like, oh my God. And that scene is built in such a way that you don't really, at least for me, I didn't go into it as a first time viewing knowing that's what was going to happen. But then you find, at least even when I watched it a second time around, I knew it was going to happen. And I don't think I was prepared then either. Because I'm like, you're watching it, and then it does the camera shots where you're looking almost like down her body at her feet
Hmm.
because she's kicking in the car. And I'm a was I a mother then? The first time I watched it? I probably was, but I was either at the end of my pregnancy, so I may not have been like out mom yet, but like, or I had a newborn, but like I have a small child now. Like, and the intensity of that moment hit completely different this time around, because I was just like, would do it. The mother in me is like, I need to help this baby. Like, and it was so hard. And the brother is like in distress, like trying to, and then that moment comes and you're just like, I wasn't ready the second time around either. Like, it just knocked the wind out of my lungs. Like, I just was not. I don't know. That was like a really, and then of course, like you, it's crazy because that was the scene, the first time I watched it, it blew me away. And then I felt like everything lulled. But then when I watched it this time, I got emotional hearing Annie's response to finding the body in the car.
Oh my God. Like, we don't have enough time in this video to discuss what I was feeling because yeah, I was convinced the same way with Barbarian. I walked in convinced. I know where this movie's going. I've seen this before.
Yep.
Yada yada. I'm kicking my feet back. It was the Thursday showing. It might have even been Wednesday. It was like a kind of a pre-screening
Oh, okay. Yeah.
for Movie Pass members or something.
Sure.
So I walked in kind of being like, all right, there's not a lot of people here. I'm going to enjoy this. I already know what's coming. Scariest movie since The Exorcist. All right, cool. Let's see how that works out.
Yeah.
I like immediately I was kind of leaning forward and just because that's how compelling the film was to me. And it was
Yeah.
so again, you can tell when a filmmaker is in command of his actors, his script. You can just tell, you feel
Oh,
it, and it
yeah.
makes you almost subliminally just want to get up and like lean forward and be like, what's going on?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
But that scene when I didn't realize what was going to happen until the second it happened, or right before, when
Yeah.
she sees the telephone pole, and then boom, that happens, and I seriously flew back in my chair, like, and it's one of those big leather chairs with recliners, and I was like, oh,
Yeah, that was
well, I didn't like. I was looking around to see if anyone else was kind of, and like, sure enough, people were like, um, and where you expect like the kind of the music to kind of rise and Peter to run out of the car and like scream for help. None of that happened. It was very silent, and I had never seen a scene play out like that where it's an accident, but the person behaves in such a way that was so unusual yet so believable. You
because
know,
yeah, I thought the same exact thing as far as it being believable because it was almost like autopilot. He was so traumatized by what he knew had happened.
hmm
He just went on autopilot. He drives home, he gets in bed, and he's got this like deer in the headlights look. And then until we hear the response in the morning when Annie goes outside, and then he like shudders in reaction or like has like something more to do physically than to just like stare off. And that scene like that was so like I don't know. I wasn't, because again, like I said, I'd already seen it. So I'm thinking these moments are not going to get me as much as they did, the first time. But I don't think that's true. And I think because I was more invested and more engaged this time around, I got a lot more out of out of Annie's reaction than I did the first time too. And then like I just like
it was unbearable the first time. I like the first time I saw it, like I was completely in it. And when I
mm,
heard her shrieking and like on the floor and just howling with pain and grief, I didn't know what to do with myself. Like I felt like I
yeah,
was in the room with her,
I know what you mean.
and then you see Peter kind of outside of the room, just still not with it. And it was such a dark cloud that felt like it was over me. And that cloud doesn't really leave, at least from my first experience. Every
Yeah.
time I watch this film, I've only seen it a few times. Midsommar, I've seen even less because that one I saw like at a time when it was really kind of paralleling what I was going through in real life.
Yeah, I understand that.
But it's just such an oppressively dark feeling.
Mm.
And to your point from the start of the video, I can't imagine someone not being even a little bit affected by this.
Something.
You know?
Yeah. I think that, and that's the thing. And I like, I don't think, I've seen people talk about how it makes them feel because they're parents. I don't think you have to be a parent to understand this. I don't think you have to be a parent to feel the weight of this moment and what this means. And then you've got, the guilt of the brother and the situation, the circumstance surrounding it with like taking her when she didn't want to go. And then you've got the mother's loss as a mother. And yeah, it's a lot. And I think that, that's like with grief horror, what makes it work is the balance between the scary and the sad. And I feel like this movie is so full of hopelessness.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know that there's a single moment of light in this. And I'm not sure how to explain why that's okay, or like why it was good, or why that works, but it just did. Because I think instead of breaking up the sadness with light, we get the random, or I say random, but the scary moments that
Yeah.
aren't necessarily the sad moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, like, like the scene. Okay, so this is a first watch, this scene didn't get me, and as a second watch, it didn't get me. And I know this bothered a lot of people, but towards the end of the film, in our third act, when Peter is walking through the house and he finds his dad, who has now been burnt up,
Mm.
and Annie is on the wall behind him, that didn't get me either time. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why, because all of the stuff that happens after did. But her being on the wall, like, I know a lot of people go to that, and I know this made it onto Shudder's 101 scariest moments or whatever, and I'm pretty sure that that's the moment from the film that they used, was that scene set up where he comes into the, I think, like the living room or the den or
Yeah.
whatever. He's looking at the burnt body, and then we get this shot of her up here in this corner, but his attention doesn't go there. His attention goes
Yeah.
here, and then that's when we see one of the cult members in that dark doorway.
Oh,
And that got me. Like, that
that
was
is one of the scariest things I've ever seen in my life. I was like, first of all, going back for a second in that same
yeah,
scene,
yeah,
I, the first time I saw it, it took me longer than it should have to notice Annie in the room,
yeah.
in Peter's bedroom, I mean, not in the living room.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that one, because like she's there, and then the second viewing, I was like, she's been there the whole time. But it takes a cult member outside to ignite the motion sensor light, where he lights it just a little bit more,
where
and
you
that's where,
can.
that's, if you didn't see her before, you see her now.
That one
and
was good.
and
That's well
that's,
done. Yeah.
I saw it that Wednesday screening, but then I took my coworker and one of my good friends to see it on Saturday with a
Okay.
much more packed house.
Yeah.
And knowing what to look for was incredible, because I could hear people in different parts behind me, in front of me, to my side, picking up on it, and all of them were like, "Oh fuck!" Like you can tell the moment that they picked up on it. Having her being on the ceiling in that scene didn't get me. That
Yeah.
one did,
The
because but
first one did.
yeah,
Yeah.
the first one did, because
Yeah.
by the time that you're in
I
the living
agree.
room, you've already seen her crawling out of the room. You know that she's going to be wherever Peter
Somewhere
is.
like a spider. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but
Yeah.
but having the nude smiling cult member
Nope.
that we saw at the very
I have
beginning,
goosebumps. Like, oh.
standing in the corner,
Oh.
in the doorway,
Mm-hmm.
I that just it actually reminded me of a scene in Session 9, which I won't spoil, where there is another character in a dark hallway who appears. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
that's
Yep.
another
Yep.
scene
Yep.
that I literally
So good.
grasped my chest, and I was like, "Oh my
Oh.
god!" And like, and it's so simple. It's someone just in a doorway, but it's where they shouldn't be there. Who is
Yeah.
this person? What do they want?
It's true.
And then Annie kind of runs out of the corner. You're like, "Oh no, okay."
Yeah, and then this is of course this is all when everything like boop boop like amps up towards, because this is literally like the final act of the film.
Mm.
Because then one of the most like scenes for me is like right after that, when he goes up into the attic, he closes the attic, and you hear the banging on the door, and you're thinking punching, got something, shoving it up there, and then it zooms down to that weird angle, and it's her banging her head against the bottom of the attic door. Like,
No, 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 no.
oh my
What
god.
what Ari Aster does so well, and he did this with Midsommar as well,
Yeah.
is that, the pacing is pretty even keeled up
Mhm.
until the final 20,
Mhm.
30 minutes. There,
Mhm.
it's spiked with different surprises and
Yeah.
kills or gore or whatever.
Yep.
But in the last 20 minutes, the way that he builds chaos, just he does it so well. Like having it be the cult member in the doorway, Peter seeing his father burnt without a head, and you're like, what the, and like just processing all that. His mother's chasing him. He's up in the attic. She's banging her head with the thing. Then he starts seeing the grandmother's body, and then the cult, and then seeing that whole shit right there. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so, it's overwhelmingly just chaotic and
Yeah.
like horrifying.
Yeah, and we talked about this with the with the head and the post scene, this use of silence, because that's what happens when he's in the attic. It gets like dead quiet and then he just jumps through the window. And it's the sound design of like this intense, 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 and then it gives you nothing,
Yeah.
which is just as unsettling as what you were just listening to. And then he jumps out the window. You're just like,
Just like the music cutting out when you see one of the cultists just like kind of they're all nude and she
yeah.
waves at him, and it's the same one who was waving at Charlie. And
Nope.
by the time that you realize who it is, Peter's already
He's like, I'm
tucked
out.
himself out. Yeah. I don't blame
Me
him.
too, though.
I don't blame him. I would have been like, all right.
I'm just gonna take my chances out
Yeah.
this window.
He pulled the Sally Hardesty right there.
That's right. Yeah, and then like, okay, so the light anomaly.
Yeah.
We see it a couple of times, but this is the first time. At first, I was like, and I didn't remember this part. This was not a part of the ending that I recall directly from my first viewings. Again, it's been years, and I never watched it until now. But I was like, what when I saw the movement, because you kind of see it like a little bit off from his body.
Mhm.
I thought it was like somebody crawling up to him, which was
Yeah.
creepy in and of itself. And then I realized it was like the light.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell what it was. And so like the light, and then the light kind of like, so is the light, what is the light? Is the light supposed to be what's going in? Is it supposed to be like, I'm not sure what the light is.
The light is Payman.
It is. Okay.
The light has left, there's a scene of Charlie with the pigeon head or whatever it was. She's
Yes.
like kind of gluing it onto something, and you see it's very subtle, but you see the light pass through a room,
Yes.
and then once she's gone, you start to see it more frequently.
Right.
You
And
see
then,
it in
yeah. Okay.
class, and then if you follow it, it goes into Toni Collette. It leaves her once she's, piano wired
Ugh.
her head off, and then it goes into him. So this mischievous little fuck known as Payman, once it
Yeah.
left Charlie, Charlie's just like a very sweet soul who was housing it. Unfortunately, she had to go as part of the sacrifice.
Right.
But then that thing has been causing a lot of this trouble since
I
then,
see.
and it
Okay.
finally has its host in Peter.
I gotcha. Okay. Because then he gets up, the light kind of goes over him. He gets up and he looks. This scene was a little cheesy, but I get why it's done the way that it's done, which is when he sees the who
Oh,
is it? Annie's body going
Yeah.
up but it's like floating and it goes
Yeah.
up. It's a little cheesy. That part was a little cheesy. I was like, oh,
I
that kind of
have
thing.
to. I defend it only insofar as I love when a horror filmmaker does something that will most likely divide people knowingly. He had to have known that this
Yeah.
particular shot will have half people going ooh and half people going, oh come on,
Yeah, that's
I
true.
love that.
Well, and I think what I do understand about it is there had to be a reason for him to go, like there needed to be like a guiding something to that space from where he is on the ground. So like I understood its purpose.
Yeah,
But yeah, to me it was that was like a
the
little,
visual is just it's so odd.
it is odd.
It's just like
Maybe
what?
it's more odd than cheesy, but
Yeah.
it felt strange given the everything else we've seen up to this point.
Mm.
But yeah, no, and then when he goes up, this is kind of when we get like our big wrap up of like information, I guess, of like
Yeah.
story of like what's going on, which he goes up into the attic. He sees all the cult members, they're like down. Annie's body and Steve's body, right, are knelt down.
Yep, Stephen, Annie, and Ellen.
And then Ellen, that's right. And then they've got the idol or whatever you want to call it with Charlie's head and the crown and like what the like this is, and see, and here's the thing, like cult stuff to me, whether it's supernatural cults or regular people cults, they're scary. Like they're scary because
Yeah.
let's just say hypothetically speaking that this king of hell didn't exist, and when people believe in something that strongly, they would do things like this doesn't even feel that far-fetched in my opinion, like as far as the lengths people would go to get something that they want from something they believe in. Like I just don't think that that's far-fetched. So when we get this scene of him like, and he's got and it does, and the thing is like it's not even that many people, but it's enough people though that you're like, this is not somewhere I want to be. Like it's not, you're not walking into like a church full of like 150 people. There's however many people can fit in that space.
Yeah.
But like that's probably not it. And I don't know, like my head went all kind of directions at this last little bit of this movie because, we get like when she addresses Peter as Charlie, I was like, what?
Charlie,
And
I
then
thought that was someone else.
I'm like, I'm so confused. And then because then she says, Joan says, when she's doing her little like prayer or whatever, she says, I forget exactly the wording, but basically we've corrected the first female and now it's like a healthy male. And I was like, what? I was so confused. And
Yeah.
so one of the reasons I rewatched it was because I was still really confused. Like I was like, okay. But so I guess what that means is that and you kind of, I think, explained some of this when talking about the light. So it was in Charlie first.
Yes, this is why Annie was saying that Ellen throughout her, Charlie's, infancy,
She was
she wanted to
very,
breastfeed her. She had like her hooks in her a little bit. She
yeah,
always
yeah, yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
get at her, so that
Yeah.
when Peter was born, she made an effort not to let that happen. Because Annie, who knows to what extent she was aware of this. But I think this is number one, the reason why she kept Peter especially away from his
Mm,
grandmother, but
yeah.
also the reason why she, you know, whether it was sleepwalking or some sort of dissociative episode, she tried to kill her, uh, set both of her children on fire because she knew on some level that their fate was not good and that they
Hmm.
were ultimately going to be used as pawns in this kind of scheme
Yeah.
that her mother and this cult had concocted for them.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
apart from being aware of it, to your point from before about cults, who's to say like Annie believed any of it, even if it was true? It's like you're gonna breastfeed my child. You want my son for what? For this demon from hell? Give me a
Yeah.
break. Like no, stay away from my family.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But that ending is uh, another example of the exposition that we were talking about, where the final explanations are put into the mouth of someone who is communicating to a demon, now becoming cognizant of its purpose on Earth in a human form.
Yeah.
So it makes sense why she is saying all this to them.
Yeah. Yeah, another really smart way to get out the rest of the explanation without leaving it too open, because
Mhm.
without that explanation it would have been too open. There would have been way
Yeah.
too many things. It could have been you're leaving viewers way too much freedom to come up with an ending on their own in their heads. And so that little bit, and that part doesn't last very long. That's very quick. Like she doesn't say a ton, but she says just enough to put the pieces together, I think, for the most part, and then kind of wrap up the rest. Oh, sorry, I scared my cat when I hit my keyboard. Sorry. He like jumped out of his skin. It's all right. Um, yeah, but I think like it wraps everything up like in a way that it's, I don't know, like, and it's so uncomfortable because she goes over to this decapitated child, takes this crown thing off of her head, comes over, puts it. I'm like, oh my god, like and I know like Peter doesn't care at this point because he's not really Peter anymore, but it's
Yeah.
still, it was just like this idea of like the moving from this so heavy, like it was a lot.
No, it's I think it's one of the best endings. Like, and this is what I'm talking about with a lot of fans who, you cannot deny that when you bring up Hereditary, it'll bring up two sides of the same coin. People who are like, "Oh my God, I love it," or people who are like, "Oh, it's the worst movie ever. This is
So
useless."
true.
But it's a provocative film in that you
Mm,
can't just walk away not feeling something. We've
I
talked about that
agree.
before. But just as a fan, or as a fan of horror or cinema, it
Yeah.
provokes reactions from the fans that way, and I think that
Yeah.
says a lot. It's not a film that people bring up and you go, "Oh, that
It's
one."
not a meh
It's
film.
so
That's
it's
true. No middle
right.
ground.
No middle ground. Very, very time. Like I don't think
That's
I've
true.
ever met or spoken to someone who didn't feel one way or another about it. Um,
No. And to your point, like even though it came out in 2018 or in 2023, I got a ton of engagement when I posted about this. Like even now,
mhm.
because like you said, it invokes things in people, whether it's a good or a bad or whatever. people have strong feelings about this film. Like, somebody commented in the same breath that somebody hated it and was saying all those things that they didn't like. There was another person that was like, this became the scariest movie I've ever seen when I saw this in theaters. Like, you have it on, like, on both sides, to your point, exactly. Like, and it's interesting because I think whether people like the film or not almost feels irrelevant when you compare it to how many people still talk about it, because
Yes.
that means that the filmmakers did what they probably set out to do. Because there are plenty of movies we watch and we go, oh, we never talk about them again. But the fact
Yeah.
that
So many
this,
of them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but this is not one of those. Even as somebody who initially hated it, like, I hated this movie. I thought it was dumb and boring, and I didn't understand the obsession with it, and I hated it for years. And I think that even as someone who hated it, I still had a lot to say about it. And I
Mm.
think that that kind of can go, like, I mean, it's just stirs up conversations no matter when you're posting about it. And I think that that speaks to the writing and the film and as a whole, like, it just does.
I said that exact thing to someone. I think it was on Instagram or someone.
Hmm.
I think it was a post that was kind of making fun of Hereditary and in general elevated horror,
Yeah,
which I think is just I think it's used as a term. The term is used as a cudgel now to kind of beat down films that are aiming for loftier ambitions. They're
sure.
they're trying to say something about us as people, or they're trying to make some
Mm,
sort of a larger point. And I feel like some people immediately it's like, oh, it's trying to be elevated. It's like, well,
yep.
let the filmmaker tell you what they're trying to do. Watch the film and judge it on
Yeah.
its own terms. Don't use this kind of catch-all term to kind of criticize it. But I said to I responded. I cannot remember who posted it, but I said, you can say a lot about Hereditary, but number one, you won't forget it, and it will be in the conversation of the pantheon of great horror films. In other words, the ones that we discuss for decades to come, if not more.
Forever.
I think people
I
will still
agree.
be talking about it at sleepovers and in film school.
Yeah.
That's something that not many filmmakers, horror or otherwise, can say.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think too, the other thing with the elevated horror thing, because I certainly say it sarcastically, because it's more of like because it has become this, like you said, it's a catch-all for horror. People don't want to take the time to understand, and that can
Mm.
upset people, but it's the truth. This comes, in my humble opinion, as a horror fan, somebody who's been watching horror movies for a really, really long time. I feel that this term gets used because at the time that these films became more prominent, we were seeing more films that were doing things that had been done but doing them differently.
Mm.
um it's because, to me, if you're not looking for a message genuinely, and I mean this genuinely because I know people that didn't get it, if you watched Night of the Living Dead and you go into it thinking it means nothing, it's just a zombie movie, that's what you're going to walk away with. You're going to walk away with
Mm.
a zombie movie, because it wasn't this, like, it's not in your face. There's not this, like, it's this very subtle sense of getting that message across. And now we have horror that is willing to push the envelope, push the limits, make those things more prominent in their themes, in addition to the horror side of it. And I think what's happened is we've got this generation of horror fans that are watching these dime a dozen horror films, and then they just happen to go see these because they're hyped or they're in theaters, and it's not a traditional experience, so therefore it has to be elevated horror. Because I
Mhm.
didn't get it, I wasn't a big fan, it wasn't, Jason, it wasn't all these, like, very typical horror things. And I think that it's kind of like it's a bummer, because like you said, it gets, people are using this as just like a catch-all for horror that I think they just don't want to take the time to understand, or even, or be interested in, other than entertainment value, because that's not what this film is for, in my opinion.
No, no, no. No, I mean, like what I loved about Ari Aster, and you said before, it's almost okay that there's no hopelessness. And I think a large part you touched on was that there still are these kind of comforting horror tropes that are
Yes.
throughout it. The
Yeah, 100%.
seances, the beheadings, all that stuff that we kind of recognize, just like, oh, I love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mixed in with all this misery and all this kind of,
So true.
heavy Ibsen-esque drama that we're looking at.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
but I do, for anyone who's watching who kind of looks down on A24, I know people who, if it's A24, they'll shit on it without
Yeah.
like
No
just
matter what.
a priori of not watching it at all.
Yeah.
They just have no time for that. And I'd say, push your own push yourself as a viewer to kind of wrestle with these things a little bit more. Watch, film like Men is an interesting example because as
I
much as I
really
appreciate,
want to see that one. I haven't
you
yet,
haven't seen
not
it yet.
because it's A24, but just because I haven't. I was going to wait for it to come on streaming, and then I kind of forgot about it because I was trying to catch up with other stuff at the end of the year, and I just have not circled back to it yet.
All right, so I won't give anything away, but whereas Midsommar, The Witch, The Babadook, Hereditary, it follows. There's a lot of subtext in what's going on, mixed in with all these horror
Mm-hmm.
iconography, these horror images.
Yeah.
Men goes a step further by making the subtext part of the actual text and part of the actual imagery.
Okay. Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
so it presses you even further than what even I was expecting.
Okay.
Being like, I have no idea what I just watched. On
Yeah.
a gut level, I understood it, but
Yeah.
intellectually, my mind was scrambled.
I
And I've seen it now
understand.
twice. But let me know what you think about it, and you'll see what I mean. Like,
I definitely
it's
intend to
very
watch
heady.
that one. Yeah. And I think the only other A24 movie that I have really liked, I loved, and it was Saint Maud.
Oh, Saint Maud was wonderful.
It's so good. It checked so many freaking boxes for me. Like I loved it from beginning to end, and I knew going into it was A24, but I was like, "Oh, no, we're going to watch this." It's got religious stuff in it. Like I'm here for it. And so I watched it, and God, that one got like into my skin. Like that one was so good and so beautifully acted. Oh my God.
Mm,
Like I loved Saint Maud. Saint Maud was really, really good. And it was probably the first A24 film I had seen that really made me think about, being open to watching other ones. Cause I mean, I hadn't, some stuff I had seen and I didn't know it was A24. That's a thing. But and of course they also do stuff that's not horror. I mean, it's a production company, so they don't just
yeah,
do horror, but I don't think I've seen anything of theirs that wasn't horror, but anyway, but Saint Maud was really, really good. Midsummer was okay. The Witch was really just a very slow burn, and
mm,
those are really hard sells for me and it sucks because I love the ending. I thought the story was really good. The acting, what they went through to make that movie look well, they did. So the lighting in it is 100% time or period correct.
yeah.
It did not
Candles,
use
sunlight.
I mean, and I have like mad respect for for them making that happen because it works. Like it
Mm,
worked so well. And so there's a lot of things about The Witch that I appreciated, but it was a little too slow.
sure.
And then, and I'm walking away, from Hereditary with a new appreciation for it. Like I said, I don't think it's going to make, like a top 10 for me or anything like
Mm,
that, because I mean, it still is not really my normal like go-to style for horror, but I do think if you've watched a horror movie and you had bad company or loud company while you were watching it, and it's a movie like this and you hate the movie, I highly recommend revisiting it by yourself, because I watched this by myself. And I think that, I honestly wasn't sure how I was going to feel walking away from a second viewing. But if you had asked me if I thought I was going to go that up that high, I would have said probably not. Like I maybe would have figured, maybe it'll end up as a 4 or a 5, but I found myself really uncomfortable. I found myself scared. I found myself sad. And I felt like that sense of hopelessness we talked about. Like I felt all those things. And the more that I felt those things, the higher that number became. And then that was, the 7.5 is about what I fell on. But yeah, I think this was definitely a good idea to revisit it, because I walked away with a completely different, perspective on it.
Well, I'm glad that you watched it again, and I'm glad that your score was what it was. I was seriously ready to come into this to defend the film ardently. I was ready to counter every point and be like, "Well, it's actually a comment on all that other stuff."
You're like, I've had these conversations before. I'm ready.
Yeah. So I'm delighted to hear that on a second watch
Yeah.
you saw a lot more of what I've seen the times
Yeah.
that I've watched it, and it's not a film that I go to often just because it's so heavy, and
Hmm.
because if I'm feeling
It is
down or
heavy.
if I just want comfort food, I will not be reaching for Ari Aster. I'm sorry, like,
Yeah,
and
no freaking kidding.
I think he would understand. He's like he does not make easy digestible films. They're meant to be like
Completely
difficult,
agree.
and they're meant to make you reckon with these larger themes and these larger ideas. But
Yeah.
I'm delighted that you enjoyed, you appreciated it more.
I did. Yeah, I really do. And I would think, it's probably a film I'll revisit, in the future. I do. Yeah, I think the second watch was warranted. And maybe it would have been anyway. I don't really know, obviously, but I do, like I said earlier, I think there are just some films that there's so much there to really experience and kind of soak up. And I think that some things you just have to see more than once. And I think I would definitely categorize Hereditary as a more than a one watch film for sure.
Absolutely. If anyone's watching, if you've only seen it once
See it
and you
again.
didn't like it, watch it again.
I
It's
agree.
not terribly long.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks for coming and talking Hereditary. I know
It,
you were like, I feel very strongly about this movie. I
it,
was like,
it
all right, let's
it's
do it.
like for me, other than Session 9, like there's Session 9, Black Christmas, Halloween, in terms of
Yeah.
just formative scary films.
Mhm.
Scream, I saw at the age of 10. I
Yeah.
don't know what I was thinking, but that movie also terrified me.
Yeah.
There's other films that hit the spot, but Hereditary, for all intents and purposes, is the scariest movie I've ever seen
Yeah.
for those reasons that we've discussed, and just a lot more. Like I could discuss this for another couple hours, and maybe at some point we'll do like a really deep dive into it. But
Yeah.
just in a general sense, I was disturbed, perturbed, shocked, and just deeply terrified in a way that in 2018 I didn't think that I could be as a horror fan.
Yeah.
I was skeptical, and I was like, you feel jaded after a while
Oh my
until
god,
something
so
comes
true.
and shakes you up, and you're like, all right, now I'm listening again. As a horror fan, I feel like
I
I'm
know what you
seeing
mean.
something new. Yeah,
Yeah, that's me with with found footage right now. Tom and I do a series every Friday on found footage. And so I've been watching a lot of it. And there's a
The
lot.
Outwaters,
Huh?
the Outwaters.
I haven't seen it yet because it's only in theaters right now, right? Yeah. I get very few opportunities to go to theaters. But and there's a couple things that are my absolutes. I will figure it out. But Scream 6, I'm absolutely going to see in theaters. And Evil Dead Rise is another one.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I'm gonna end up making Cocaine Bear in theaters or not. I feel like that would be really fun in theaters, but it just depends. It just depends. I'm like, I'm a single mom, so like my time like to be able to go do that stuff is very, very slim to none. So there's very special films, And then I made time to go see Titanic for the 25th anniversary this past weekend.
Very good choice.
Yes, IMAX and Real D 3D, which I thought was going to give me a panic attack, but it wasn't too bad.
Oh,
Because I have like a huge fear of water, and I can just picture 3D water, but it's not quite like that. It just adds like depth to it. It's not like the same like the red
interesting.
and blue like over the top stuff. So
Yeah.
anyway, but yeah. So I haven't seen Outwaters yet. I will have to wait probably until that one comes to streaming. But we tried to catch up on a lot of 2022 ones. There's just a lot of duds. There's just so much. And I'm like dying for some good ones because found footage is my favorite subgenre. And right now I'm like bitter because, like you said, you become jaded. You see so many, of the same ideas, or they're not, or they're just not as effective, or they're boring, or outright silly, or whatever the case is. But like in the last like month of episodes, we've given our lowest ratings that we've done since we started the show last July. Like
Ugh.
I'm just like, and I'm like, I'm dying for something new. We did cover Skinamarink, which there's an argument in that episode about is it really found footage? Is it not? What makes it kind of like found footage? Whatever, which I loved. Skinamarink, spoiler
Yeah.
alert, loved it. And that's another one that has like a lot of layers to it. But yeah, I'm like, I know exactly what you mean. There's been multiple dips in horror quality as far as what's available to us. And thankfully this last year and a half hasn't really been that. There's been some really great stuff, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, you get so sick of seeing the bad. You're like, I love this genre so much, but I need something good. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Like, and when you're with some friends, you're just kicking back, you just want to watch something easy. There's many films you can go to, but when I love the
Mm-hmm.
thrill, like with Barbarian, for instance, not
Mm,
it was in my top 5, I think, of last year. I kind of battled with where to put it.
yeah.
I have some issues with the back half, but
Yeah.
the first 45 minutes up until one of the big reveals,
Yep.
um, was just another instance where I leaned forward and I was like,
It's
wait,
really
this
strong.
is so cool.
Hmm.
I don't know what to think. I don't know what to feel, but I'm in it.
Yep, I
And I
agree.
love that feeling. No pet a few of those as well, where I was just like, I've not seen anything quite like this before. And
Yeah.
that I think that's thrilling.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And getting unique horror just recently started becoming a little easier because now you've got things like Shudder and Tubi, and what's the other one? The newer one, Screenbox, who are giving these indie filmmakers a platform. And so I'm finding a lot of indie films are, when I got ready to do my top 10 for the year for 2022, a lot of indie films were beating out the bigger players, like
Hmm.
because their ideas are so different, they're so unique, they're not continuations, they're not remakes, they're not the same stuff we've seen over and over and over again, these franchises that we've seen 1,000 times. And so, like one of my favorite movies that came out last year, it didn't end up making my final 10, but it was in the running for it, was a film called What Josiah Saw. Did you see that
Oh,
one on
yes.
Shudder?
Love
It's
that one.
so good, but it's so different. It's such a different
Oh
film. And
yeah.
I like, it was captivating. It was beautifully acted.
Spooky as hell.
Oh my God.
Like
Yeah,
creepy.
so creepy. From beginning to freaking end, I was into the story. And that's an indie film. That's not from one of the bigger production companies and stuff. So I can see back in 2018, like watching this as a first watch, and being able to experience it in a way different than I did for my first watch, and being just like really blown away, and being like that excitement for horror coming back. Like, okay.
Well, I was thinking about this, during the pandemic, during the early days when we had nothing to do except just kind of like make bread and just watch TV. I
Make
was
bread.
thinking about it. I was like, like your little starter kits and stuff. But
Yeah.
I was wondering what kind of art will come out of this, music. But I was thinking, of course, horror. Like what kind of stuff would come out of this? Host was a film that dealt
Oh,
directly with it,
so good.
which I really enjoyed that one.
Yep.
But I feel like if you look at a lot of the films that we've gotten that are wonderful, I wonder how many of them were birthed out of the 2020 or so.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to kind of track,
And
what
see.
Josiah saw. Like, see, when was that thought up? You know,
And yeah,
just out of curiosity. I
that's
feel
true.
like it's a huge creativity spark from that one.
It did. And not just in film, but writers. There's a
Hmm.
lot more like there's content creators. There's like it's crazy the stuff that came out of it was it really gave people an opportunity to like seize that creative itch and just like get it out of there, like make something with it or do something with it. And yeah, that's true. It's been crazy.
That's it. Like as long as we have new voices in horror, it'll keep developing, keep evolving,
Yep.
and we'll have many, many more movies to discuss and argue about and kind of shit talk on Instagram and all that stuff,
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
and do kind of debates with. And it's an exciting time to be a horror fan.
It really is. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Totally agree. Um, well, yeah, I'm gonna put all of Robbie's socials and stuff in the description for this episode, just like before, so you can go follow him and read his reviews and stuff. Thanks again for making time to do this. This was fun. I have other things. The Witch is also on my list to revisit. I have, some other stuff that I want to go back to that I just give the middle finger every time it comes up, that I'm like, you know what? But it's all one watch stuff. It's stuff I've only
Yep.
ever seen one time, and then I never watched it again. So I've got an ongoing list of things to revisit, because all films that I hate, that I want to go back and really take another opportunity to see how I feel. And so there will be more like this in the future, where I'm going back and talking about films that I hated, and hopefully walking away with at least a new respect or a new appreciation. So thanks for
I
doing this.
absolutely, I cannot wait to see what other films you revisit, what you think of them on a rewatch, and thank you so much for having me. I
Yeah,
appreciate
of
it.
course. Yeah, you're
Wonderful
welcome
talking to
to
you.
come. Oh
Uh,
yeah, this was fun. Yeah, we'll do something again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us on this episode of Saturday Horror Movie Reviews. We hope you have a good weekend. Have a good week coming up, and we'll see you in the next one.